Unsung Murder Ballads discusses topics of a disturbing nature.
And we're not going to hold back on the graphic details and disturbing content.
So we do not recommend our podcast for children under the age of 13.
And while we respect the victims and their families involved in these tragic cases,
we're also going to be critical of mistakes that are made during the investigations.
And we're going to use dark humor to express ourselves now and then.
So with that said, this podcast may not be for everyone.
And that's okay. We're glad you're here checking us out.
And if you've made it this far, welcome to the Unsung Murder Ballads family. And follow us on Instagram at Unsung Murder Ballads if you want to talk to us.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Unsung Murder Ballads. I am Janus Dead.
And I'm Jameson Dead.
All right, so tonight we have an interesting case for you.
All right, you got a teaser for me tonight, or are we just jumping right in? Of course,
no, this is the teaser right here.
Okay.
It was May of 1992, and a young girl was going door to door to get signatures for a bookathon. Now, I had to look that up because while it sounded familiar to me, I was having trouble with it exactly what a bookathon was.
Okay.
Essentially, for those that are not familiar, it's where young students get adults to agree to pay money based on how many books they read during a certain time frame, for example, the summer. So basically, yeah, if this little kid comes up to you and says, well, sign up for my bookathon and I agree to pay $1 for every book this kid reads. At the end of the summer, when he shows up and claims he read 50 books, I got to give him $50.
See, now, I remember as a kid, it wasn't so much signing up for money. It was like certain pizza places did it where if you read so many books, you got a free small pizza or something like that.
Okay. I think this is done through the school, which is why it's not like a free pizza.
Well, yeah, but I mean, same kind of concept where you go to that person or that establishment and say, hey, I held up my end of the bargain, what do I get in return?
Right. No, and that's cool. I don't remember having a bookathon when I was a kid. We did have the March of Dimes where we would walk and people would pay money based on how far we walked, which I never participated in. I'm not going to lie. I'm not that athletic now. I mean, I did serve in the military, so it's not that I wasn't athletic, but I was just more of like, yeah, I don't care about this. I didn't want to participate.
Fair enough.
So this little girl was going about her surrounding neighborhoods to get adults in the area to sign up. And as this is a murder podcast, eventually this girl knocked on the wrong door.
Yep.
A man grabbed her, pulled her into the apartment, and quickly cut her throat.
Holy crap, that escalated quickly.
Yeah, it happened that fast. So in this episode, we will be looking into the crimes of a man that became known in his community as the zombie hunter.
Ooh, okay.
As well as some of the crimes that may not have been proven to be him, but most likely are. So, are you ready?
Let's do this. I'm intrigued.
All right, so in 2014, Bryan Miller was known to many in the Phoenix area as the zombie hunter, a comic book inspired character who wore a mask and a long trench coat and carried a fake Gatling gun. He literally drove around in a tricked out old police car and attended events, taking photos with fans and even legitimate police officers. So just picture a cosplayer driving around Phoenix that's becoming locally popular.
He's LARPing.
He's LARPing, exactly. Investigators would later learn that the man behind this costume character had an extremely violent past. He was living in Hawaii for a while as a kid with his mother and father, but his father died early when he was young in a motorcycle accident.
Oh, that sucks.
Years later, Miller and his mother Ellen moved to Phoenix. So for most of his life and early years, it was Bryan Miller and his mom exclusively. In May of 1989, a Phoenix woman named Celeste Bentley got off a bus at the same stop as 16-year-old Miller. She said, well, when he ran by me, I thought he had just hit me. But then I reached back to my back and pulled my hand away, and I saw blood.
Oh, God.
Miller had run past her and stabbed her in the upper back.
Who?
Yeah. He was caught and charged with aggravated assault and sent to juvenile detention where he stayed until he turned 18. While Miller was in juvenile detention, his mother Ellen made a strange discovery. She told police she found a disturbing note while cleaning his room. The note had the heading "Plan" on the second page detailed a sadistic scheme of torture and his plan to kill a young woman.
Well, that's a hell of a thing to find.
It's also really stupid to draft up. Just saying.
Oh, yeah.
So Ellen gave the note to police and refused to let her son return home after he was released, so he had to move into a halfway house. On November 8th, 1992, on the eve of her 22nd birthday, a Phoenix woman named Angela Brasso went out for a solo evening bike ride. Her boyfriend Joe stayed at home to bake her a birthday cake and expected her home within the hour. When Angela didn't return, Joe took his bike out and rode around looking for her. He told investigators that he went out 3 different times that night looking for Angela but couldn't find her. On November 9th, 1992, the next morning, police were out searching for her and found her body in a field next to her apartment. She had been fatally stabbed in the back, sexually assaulted, and decapitated.
Oh, God.
Yeah, her head was nowhere in the area.
Did they find it?
11 days later, Angela's head was spotted in the Arizona Canal about 2 miles from where her body had been found. Due to a lack of decomposition, investigators believe the killer may have kept her head in a refrigerator before dumping it in the canal.
Okay, that I was wondering. I was like, lack of decomposition, and it's in a canal. How does that work?
Yeah, well, that's how. So, September 21st, 1993, 10 months later, high school junior Melanie Bernis took an evening bike ride while her mother Marlene was out for dinner. Marlene told police that when she came home that night, Melanie and her bike were gone. The next morning, Phoenix local Charlotte Pottle was riding her bike with her daughter in the back seat, like on a, one of those double bike or whatever. It's like you can have a little kid on there.
Yes, yep.
And she rode through a strange puddle, like a strange looking puddle.
God.
Yeah. She kind of circled back to get a look and realized that the puddle was red.
Yeah, I was waiting for that.
Yep. She also noticed drag marks, so she rode home and called the police. When police came to the scene, they found Melanie's body floating in the canal, dressed in a blue bodysuit. She had been fatally stabbed in the back and sexually assaulted. The DNA from both of these victims were a match, but not in the database. Although I think at this point, maybe the database isn't as good as it is today.
Yeah, it's 93. I'm sure it was in its infancy.
Yeah. So Melanie and Angela's murders became known as the Canal Murders. In 94, investigators received a tip suggesting Miller may have had a distinctive teal bodysuit that was similar to the one Melanie was found in. Investigators at the time seemingly never looked into Miller.
Figures.
It's not a case on this show without a cop being idiots.
I don't know if you can blame it on the time or just the overall incompetence, but very, very frustrating.
I just think the police, either they're understaffed and don't have time for it, or I don't know. The whole thing's fucked up. And this is before he's publicly known as the zombie hunter. Yeah, it's not
only
like
gonna get worse.
I know, right? With a volume of tips coming in and hundreds of persons of interest, investigators were unable to find the person responsible for these murders. Decades passed with no arrests being made.
Oh my God.
Yeah. After Miller had gotten married and had a daughter, his family moved to Everett, Washington. It wasn't long before a 14-year-old girl was stabbed while she was walking on an Everett trail in 2000. She was lucky to have survived, as it was an extremely violent and savage attack. Authorities had focused on transients as possible assailants, so they're looking at homeless people.
Okay, sure.
right? Now, Miller, who lived less than a half a mile from the site of the attack, was never interviewed or suspected.
Seriously.
Yeah. By the time the woman contacted authorities, wasn't until 2015, after seeing Miller's arrest in 2015, and the statute of limitations on the crime against her had passed, which is ridiculous. I think anything violent should not have a statute of
I was
limitations.
going to say, there's got to be some extenuating circumstance or something. Like, that's ridiculous.
I believe the only extenuating circumstances on statute of limitations is if you blocked out trauma. If you were assaulted as a child and didn't remember it until you were an adult, that's the only time that kind of thing is allowed, I believe.
All right, what keeps somebody who doesn't have that just faking that?
I'm going to assume psychologists. I don't know.
Okay, all right.
So in 2002, also while in Washington State, Miller was charged with assault when a woman accused him of stabbing her in an unprovoked attack, according to a probable cause affidavit. The woman said Miller offered her a ride and a phone to make a call on, before he approached her with what she described as a 12-inch knife. He stabbed her in the back multiple times, causing injuries that required 30 stitches.
Oh, boy.
Miller denied the allegation, and in a legal brief, his lawyer wrote that the woman tried to rob him at knife point, and he was defending himself.
Okay.
Yeah, right. But he stabs her in the back while he's defending himself. Sure, buddy. Her injuries were the result of the struggle that followed, according to him.
Oh, now you're just grasping at straws.
Well, Miller took the case to trial, and he was acquitted.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
So in 2011, Phoenix Police Detective Charles Schwarzkopf was working with a cold case unit investigating the Canal murders. He said that there were over 600 persons of interest in the case files. So he said to someone, you know what, give me the list. Let's start at A, and I'm going to go through all the backgrounds on all these people and see if I can find anyone in there that could possibly have committed this type of potential violence. In late 2014, forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick spoke to investigators at a conference. Fitzpatrick's company, Identifinders International, had developed software that could mine public genealogy databases searching for potential matches to the crime scene DNA. We've seen this everywhere now.
Oh, yeah.
Phoenix police sent her the DNA information from the Canal murders. Her company crunched the data and came up with the surname Miller. Schwarzkopf found 6 people with the last name Miller on his list. One of them, obviously, only 6. Actually, I'm surprised there were 6, that were like on the list already. But I guess Phoenix is a pretty big city. Yeah. So one of those names, obviously, was Bryan Patrick Miller, a 42-year-old man with a juvenile record of stabbing people. Ridiculous that he wasn't higher on the list early.
I was going to say, big spotlight right on that name.
You'd think so. So December 2014, Schwarzkopf began to conduct surveillance on Miller and observed him while on his breaks from work at the Amazon warehouse. To determine if he was the killer behind the decades-old Canal murders, Schwarzkopf would need to obtain Miller's DNA. So he came up with a plan. He came up with quite the little ruse. So during one of Miller's work breaks, Schwarzkopf approached Miller's car, introduced himself, and offered him a job proposal. Schwarzkopf introduced himself as a security consultant and basically said, hey, listen, I've got a team of people here in this parking lot, and we're watching this building that's north of you. He told Miller the owner suspected thieves were stealing merchandise, and he had hired him to watch the building. He said to Miller, you're always out here on your breaks. Would you be interested in working with me as a security officer watching the building while you're outside? Miller agreed, and Schwarzkopf later scheduled a meeting to fill out the job application with the hopes of getting Miller's DNA. On January 2nd, 2015, Schwarzkopf arranged for Miller to meet him at a Chili's restaurant in Phoenix. Schwarzkopf said investigators from the cold case unit were on the scene, working with the staff of the restaurant to ensure Miller's silverware and dishes were free from contamination. So they watched them pull these dishes out of the dishwasher, and they made sure that the detectives took the plates and the glassware and the silverware and everything so that no one else could possibly touch it except him, to not contaminate it with any other DNA. But when Miller arrived, to everyone's surprise, he was there with his 15-year-old daughter.
Oh, that just complicates everything.
So Miller sat down, he ordered a hamburger and water, and when he finally took a drink, Schwarzkopf knew he finally had his DNA. But he was listening to him talk, and Schwarzkopf is like, man, this guy's really mild, his temperament's not too crazy, he had this awesome rapport with his daughter, and he began doubting that Miller could actually be responsible for the Canal murders. But after the meal, everybody left, and detective seized the glass and sent it to the Phoenix Police Department for a DNA analysis. On January 13th, 11 days later, the head of the crime lab told investigators that they had a match for the DNA for the crime scenes on both Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernis. And basically, she leans down and says to him, "It's him. Bryan Miller, it's him." Miller was arrested later that day. He was charged with the first-degree murder of Angela and Melanie, and when a detective told him they had his DNA linking him to the Canal murders, he replied, "I don't see how that's possible," and he denied killing anyone. Which I guess there's nothing else you can say.
Right. What are you gonna do? Yep, you got me.
Yeah, I mean, some people would just confess. I guess it depends on what kind of criminal you are. Investigators got a search warrant for Miller's house, where he and his teenage daughter had been living. Schwarzkopf was shocked at the state this place was in. He said, "I can remember it like it was yesterday, walking up to the front door and everybody going, 'You can't get in that way. It's full of crap.'" Schwarzkopf and his team went through the entire house collecting items of evidence, but the women's long-lost bicycles were not found, which really, after all that time, I don't think you're going to find those.
Right.
And neither was any kind of murder weapon. So Miller's trial began in October of 2022. His attorneys admitted Miller was the Canal Killer, but said that due to abuse he endured as a child, he had developed severe mental health problems. So you can see where this is going.
Uh-huh.
His lawyers presented a defense that essentially blamed Miller's mother for the person he became.
I was just waiting for that other shoe to drop.
Miller's lawyer said Ellen, his mother, who died in 2010, had abused him as a child, creating these mental health problems. Cohen agreed Miller had been abused as a child after hearing psychological evidence throughout the 8-month trial. Quote, "My mother was not a very good person in so many ways, but what helped was that when I was an adult, she acknowledged that she did horrible things and apologized."
That doesn't fix anything.
No, not at all. Just because you had a shitty upbringing doesn't mean you can get away with murder.
No.
His lawyers argued that he was not guilty by reason of insanity.
There it is.
A psychologist testified that Miller developed a condition known as dissociative amnesia, the ability to remember some traumatic events but not others.
Sounds like selective memory to me.
That's basically what it is, yes. Miller's attorney claimed that he had no memory of the Canal murders. Miller claims that he did not commit the murders. Judge Suzanne Cohen found Miller guilty of both murders. So in June of 2023, Cohen sentenced Miller to death.
Oh, wow.
Under Arizona law, he had the ability to make an automatic appeal. So Miller, now in his 50s, sits on death row at the Iman Prison Complex in Florence, Arizona, at what he calls the SMU, which is short for Special Management Unit. A 48 Hours producer contacted him via email to discuss the case. 48 Hours being like a crime TV show.
Yep, I know it.
It may surprise those not familiar with prison, but apparently even inmates on death row have access to email in the state of Arizona.
That's interesting.
It's kind of weird, right?
Right.
So Miller maintains that he did not commit the Canal murders. When asked to explain how his DNA was found at both crime scenes, Miller said, "That is a question that will go unanswered." Quote, "If I had a provable answer for that, I wouldn't be in the situation now, would I?" That's valid.
Yeah. Yep.
He said he doesn't believe that he had a fair trial. Regarding prison conditions, Miller wrote, quote, "It is far from great, as I am even more isolated from those I care about and also my legal team. The food is still not great, and the cells are getting very cold now that the temperatures are falling," unquote. He sounds like this whiny little bitch.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. He also expressed his personal views on the death penalty and its effects on people that he sees around him. He said, "I see wasted lives and potential that would have been beneficial to society. I have always been against the death penalty, and the more I see what death row is and who is here and how they got here, I am even more against it. Personally, go fuck yourself, guy, you killed people."
Right. Exactly.
Miller says that what he misses most is spending time with his daughter and friends and going to car shows. Okay. So before we wrap this up, we do need to discuss Brandy Myers, who might be a victim of Miller.
Oh, okay.
Prosecutors in Maricopa County declined to charge him in a third case from before those two killings, and that was the disappearance of 13-year-old Brandy Myers in 1992, even though retired detectives in the cold case units that solved the murders of Angela and Melanie believe he was responsible for Brandy's death. Although Brandy's body has never been found and no physical evidence links Miller to her disappearance, authorities point in part to an apparent confession revealed 8 years ago as evidence of his possible guilt. It was May 26, 1992, and Brandy was going door to door with her younger sister Kristen to collect signatures for a bookathon. Brandy and Kristen lived in a small apartment complex in Phoenix, close to their school. The apartment complex was just a few blocks from the school, and the girls decided they would just kind of go in that direction. But it was at this time that Kristen decided she didn't want to go, but Brandy went anyway. The day Brandy disappeared, she had walked door to door in her neighborhood, that we know. We also have neighbors that had last seen Brandy knocking on doors down their street. The very same street that Brandy was last seen on just happens to be the same street Bryan Miller resided on in May of 92. Brandy was seen knocking on the door just 2 doors down from his house. It would be when Brandy didn't return home that night that the neighborhood quickly gathered and started a search party. The police were brought in right away to assist in the search. The following day, on May 27th, as the search continued for Brandy Myers, a different young girl's body was found in the Central Arizona Project Canal. The young victim was around the same structure and build as Brandy, but unfortunately, they would never be able to identify her body until 2011.
Whoa. Holy crap.
Yeah, almost 20 years. It was later determined that the body of the girl that went missing 8 weeks before Brandy's disappearance was named Shannon Amok. Now, Shannon's life had not been an easy life, to say the least. She was 16 at the time of her death, and nobody even reported her missing.
Oh, that's awful.
Shannon's birth was the result of a sexual assault.
Oh, okay.
Shannon resided with her birth mother until the age of 3, when her mother gave her over to custody to the state. A family in Flagstaff adopted Shannon at 3, but later stated that she was a very troubled child and they would decide to return her to the state at the age of 12.
Okay, it's not a microwave. You can't, give back a child like it's property.
100% agree with you. It's bullshit, but this happens all the time.
That's
Shan-
sickening.
Agreed. It's like with animals, That's why, and again, I don't know about if you've ever looked into adopting an animal here in Massachusetts, but to do so, they want you to bring your entire family down to interact with the dog, to make or cat or whatever, to make sure that it's a good fit for every member of your family because they don't want to have to keep taking dogs back.
Right.
It's crazy. So Shannon then began being bounced between foster homes and group homes. Before her death, she had run away over 40 times in a single year.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
So obviously when she went missing in 1992, no one was out there looking for her. Shannon would be buried as a Jane Doe until they were able to match her DNA to her birth mother in 2011. Shannon's cause of death was strangulation. Investigators would discover she was never reported missing after she had run away from a group home she was in about a month before her disappearance. No one knew when they were looking for Brandy that they already had that other girl go missing. Now, Shannon's case is still open and unsolved today. Can you imagine how fucking terrifying that is? You're out looking for one missing girl and you find another?
Yeah, that's just awful.
To me, that would be a red flag for the entire city, but somehow it wasn't.
Well, I mean, there seems like a lot of red flags that they just ignore or just don't care about.
Very true. I mean, what's up, Phoenix? So getting back to Brandy. More than 2 decades later, after a combination of genetic genealogy, DNA, and other evidence allowed authorities to identify Miller as a suspect in the killings, a cold case detective and an FBI agent interviewed a woman who, by then, was his ex-wife. As previously stated, they got married in 1997 and were separated by the year 2005. She told investigators that Miller told her about the fatal stabbing of a person he identified as an intellectually challenged Girl Scout who appeared to be in her mid-teens.
Okay.
The killing Miller allegedly described occurred after he was released from the juvenile detention on the attempted murder charge, his ex-wife told investigators, while he was living in an apartment operated by a Mennonite outreach program north of central Phoenix. When the girl knocked on his door, his ex-wife recalled him saying that he grabbed her, pulled her into the apartment, and cut her throat. He allegedly put the body in the bathtub where he intended to preserve it in cold water.
Oh, God.
However, he mistakenly ran the hot water instead.
What an idiot.
So he then allegedly dismembered her body and placed her remains in a trash can. He literally just left it sitting in his house until trash day.
Ew. No.
When neighbors complained to him about the smell, he told them that he had had some meat in his kitchen that had gone bad. Miller didn't identify Brandy by name, but parts of his wife's account were corroborated. Brandy wasn't a Girl Scout, obviously, and she had been knocking on the doors for that book drive when she vanished. She was developmentally delayed. Even though she was 13 mentally, she was probably closer to 9 or 10. And the date of her disappearance lined up with his ex-wife's account. It was roughly 2 years after Miller's release from the juvenile detention. Brandy was last seen less than 70 feet from his apartment. Mennonites who knew Miller and later talked to investigators recalled the terrible odor coming from his home, an odor that they described as worse than rotting food.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to come up with the right words to try to figure out why you think that saying it's rotting food is going to get you off the hook here.
Well, I mean, it did. He didn't get caught for it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, think about, I don't know if you've ever accidentally cooked rotting food, and having worked in a kitchen for as long as I do, you accidentally cook rotting food and it stinks up the whole place.
okay.
It can be bad. Now, I'm sure this smell was worse than that, But it's if for someone who doesn't know what the smell of like actual rotting flesh smells like, you can kind of get away with it. So that was in the fall of 92, several months after Brandy disappeared, and no remains were found. The investigators added that people who cleaned Miller's apartment didn't examine the trash when they threw everything in the dumpster, and it wasn't clear what had caused the stench. Miller wasn't suspected in her disappearance at the time, and the case went cold after an initial promising lead. A man who was later convicted of 3 killings in the Phoenix area said he would admit to having murdered Brandy in exchange for leniency. But authorities came to doubt his confession and no deal was offered. Other factors stymied investigators looking into her disappearance. There was no security camera video showing her approaching Miller's apartment, for instance, and cell phone data pinpointing Miller's or Brandy's location at the time of her disappearance. There was none of that. And it was the early 90s. There's really not much of that going on anyway.
No, not at all.
Obviously, a forensic search of the apartment in 2015 didn't yield anything. However, in the bathroom, investigators did find some blood, but it didn't match Miller or anyone else connected to the killings or disappearance. An interview investigators conducted with Miller also produced almost nothing. He recalled the case but denied knowing Brandy or having had anything to do with her disappearance or death. When he was confronted with the alleged confession, and he was not told who disclosed it, he simply said, "Whoever told you that, they're lying." There was no response from a message left at a phone number listed for ex-Miller's wife, so they tried reaching out again and didn't hear back from her. During his trial, his ex-wife testified and said that there was another incident that Miller had disclosed to her, the stabbing of a 14-year-old on the trail, but she wasn't asked about Brandy. So investigators knew about it, but didn't bring it up during his trial. They only talked about the other girl he heard.
Wouldn't you want to...
If you can't prove certain things, you got to be careful what you do in court.
Yeah, that's true. That's why I stopped myself. But
yeah,
I don't know. It kind of plays to his character. Wouldn't you want to destroy his character as much as possible?
Yeah, but at the same time, if you can't prove what's being said, you have to be careful not to look like you're trying to destroy his character.
Okay, yeah.
So in a 2015 interview with the Arizona Republic of Phoenix, his ex-wife recounted the same confession from Miller. She told the newspaper that she wasn't sure whether he was telling the truth or that she believed the disclosures were an intimidation tactic. So basically, she thinks now, maybe looking back, he was making up stories to control her through fear, which is possible. But it's also very detailed for bullshit.
I was going to say, that's going a long way for that.
So for investigators, at this point, the case is solved, but not resolved. That's how they look at Brandy's case. So in terms of her family ever getting closure, it's probably not going to happen because there's no body, which really sucks. And that's not the first time we've talked about that.
No.
What other case was that? That's really weird. I know I've said that phrase before. Huh.
I feel like we've had it at least once or twice before.
Yeah, maybe it was Israel Keys, most likely. Or no, it was probably the one in Utah where she disappeared and then he killed his 2 sons, Susan Cox Powell. Anyway, yeah, so that is the case of the zombie hunter Bryan Miller. Fucking crazy.
Yeah, absolutely crazy.
And I'm going to post pictures of this guy in his little cosplay thing with his car. It's ridiculous. Like, I can see why people would take photos with him, but it's like, what an interesting way to hide in plain sight.
It's brilliant.
In a way, yes. Because you're like, oh, that's just that eccentric loser, like you don't think he's capable. Final thoughts? I haven't asked that in forever.
I feel like they get crazier and crazier with each case and just more mind-blowing things.
Yeah, I'm definitely good at finding the bizarre ones, which I do on purpose, obviously.
Yeah.
So thank you everybody for joining us. We'll see you again soon. I am Janus Dead.
And I'm Jameson Dead.
And we'll see you next week.